All right. So another unplanned live stream. I'm making a habit out of these. However, today's unplanned live stream is one of the topics that I had previously talked about wanting to do. And I got my internet figured out. So one of the things that I was having on my most recent live was my internet was messing up. It wasn't necessarily the internet provider's fault so much as their equipment. So they sent me a new modem and router, and now we have 0 frame droppage. So we'll maybe have a new conversation again in the future. This is also at my unusual time. Hey, Jay Woodwolf. So if you didn't hear that already, the last week's live, I had my old gateway, which was causing me to lose frame and connection. Now I've got my new router and modem, and they're separate. And now it's fully stable, no frame drops. I can see on the side here, fully stable stream again. So I'm back to be able to stream. I am an hour early. Typically, I like to do 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time because of live streaming, eating lunch, and whatnot. I figured I would just stream early. Today's topic was one of the ones that I had individuals vote on. I still had some people vote on it, so I figured it was a topic they'd be interested in checking out. And with all of these lives going into my live history here on YouTube, I figured might as well talk about it, and people can catch it later, even if they can't catch it live. So, again, I've debated going back to making actual videos and cutting them and editing them and cropping them. That's a lot of work. Sometimes I just want to talk. So I figured by doing live, people have the ability to live interact with me, and then there's more of a realistic feel of conversation versus me pre-planning too much. Yeah, obviously I pre-plan and I check some of my notes before I do lives. Typically, I didn't do that today. I'm running out of time today, but it is what it is. But I wanted to talk about, for this particular topic, we're talking about further look into cultural traditions versus religion. And I think this is a topic that not only can be covered in multiple lives, but I think it's a very loaded topic. Because when you start talking about cultural traditions versus religion, you can't necessarily separate them. And then you get into some fine details where people are like, oh, well, you're taking somebody else's cultural tradition. You can't do that. That's inappropriate. And then people start talking about closed versus open practices. Now, it seems like people have a generalized opinion on what's acceptable to be closed and what's not acceptable to be closed. And I find those topics to be very triggering for a lot of folks. There's a lot of folks who have this generalized impression that if you have a light complexion, you are not entitled to cultural traditions, it seems like. But if you do not have a light complexion, then you are treading on cultural appropriation instead of cultural appreciation. I think if anything is done respectfully, though, you can do whatever you want. I see this a lot specifically. So right now there's a very popular thing, and I talk about this in a lot of my lives. I talk about this in my TikToks. I talk about this in my shorts, where a lot of people are very interested in reconstruction dealing with Scandinavia. Back in the past, it was very, very, very difficult to find books on Scandinavian lore and history. And now that they're becoming more readily available with individuals like Jackson Crawford and William R. Short, people are now starting to get into them. We're also seeing a lot more translations of the sagas and Eddas from Iceland. So people are able to access them a lot easier. And I still blame, and I've mentioned this before, the Vikings TV show. People see it and they want to emulate it. The reason I know that the Vikings TV show is partially responsible for this is we have a lot of people that are looking and dressing like they do in the TV show, which is not historically accurate in any way, shape, or form, and has nothing to do with the religion. And this kind of treads onto the topic of when I say people are tapping into cultural traditions and they're making it religious. So when you look at cultures like Scandinavia, specifically Iceland, because that's not only the one I'm most interested in, it's also the one that I have the most connection to because my mom was born there. Which, again, I've mentioned all the time whenever I talk about it, because not only am I proud of where my family came from, what my heritage is, it's the driving reason why I'm so into studying what I study when it comes to Irish and Celtic type stuff or Icelandic and Scandinavian type stuff. There are certain things that we know people used to do, right? So we have seen grave goods and grave finds. I've shown pictures that I've seen from the actual museum. You can find them in websites. People having a hammer, amulet, talisman, necklace deal that people refer to as Mjolnir, right? And people wear these. Well, we know in the past that they had them in graves. We don't know exactly why they wore them. We have some assumptions and theories. And this is where we start building modern traditions based upon old cultural traditions. We have the impression that they were worn for protection. Looking at a lot of the lore and stories. Hey, Justin Kemp, welcome. R.H. Pooh. I do not know what that's short for. If you would like to clarify and explain, I'd be happy to hear it. Ada? Yeah, not really sure what you're typing. Would need clarification, please. Sorry. Yeah, nothing to be sorry about. I just would need additional clarification on what you mean, because I'm not sure what you're referring to in the chat. But wearing necklaces for protection seems to be a common practice, wearing symbols that have meaning. And when we look at the lore, it seems that the Aesir, known as Thor, would have been an Aesir of protection, as well as many other attributes, right? So he was always protecting, whether it's Asgard or Mithengarder, he was always protecting. So people had him as a very popular deity, and we saw a lot of Mjolnir and a lot of graves. We even see during the transition period to Christianity that there was molds to cast not only pendants of Mjolnir, but also a cross as well within the same one. In fact, some of the pendants have transitioned, and there is a Icelandic wolf cross that looks like a cross but could also be a Mjolnir, and some people theorize that it was to hide that it was still a hammer to Thor versus just being a cross, or maybe it was to do both. Maybe it was a merging of the two different traditions. When we look and try to think about modern paganism and polytheism, people try to reconstruct and rebuild. So what do they have to go off of? Well, they have a few things. They have stories, and they have poems, myths, legends, and they have cultural traditions from the regions. And I think this is why you see so much of individuals looking to or being inspired by. Either that or they just think it's cool when they look it up, right? When you see a TV show, a movie, or a game, people get inspired. They're like, oh, that's cool. I want to know more about that. Nothing wrong with that. People do that all the time. But when they start trying to reconstruct, when you have a lot of these authors from the early 1900s, 1950s, sometimes mid-1900s, they started writing these books, and they're doing this based around looking at old lore, right? They look at the old stories. Even people who are inspired to do fiction and fantasy, such as Tolkien, I think it's Tolkien is how it's pronounced, J.R.R. Tolkien. He was trying to build a fantasy fairy tale around basically the British Isles, but he took from lore and history, like old sagas and Eddas and stuff. Like a lot of his stuff was really heavily from the sagas. In fact, all the names of the dwarves, including Gandalf's name, all come from a list of names of Duevgar, or that were actually listed. Or was it Alfir? Was it elves or dwarves? See, now I want to double check that. I thought it was list of dwarves. You always got to double check your sources. Tolkien derived the name Gandalf from Gandalfr, a dwarf in Valuspa. Yeah, that's what I thought. It was a dwarf's name. That's what I thought. So yeah, but it means like wand elf, which is weird, or something like that, which I always thought was interesting. But the reason I'm bringing that up is because when you talk about cultural traditions, when you're trying to build, like even when you're building a fictional world like J.R.R. Tolkien did, he's building it upon existing stories and cultural stuff to make it feel more realistic. He wanted to develop languages in his case versus building a religion. But greetings from Southwest Florida. Fadista, always great to see you. Welcome to the live. Luckily, we're going to have stability now. There's going to be no skipping or stuttering or frame drops. I got a new modem and router. So I had a gateway before, which is an all-in-one, and now they sent me these two. So I've got these now, and I have full stability, and I'm not dropping internet frames or anything. So hopefully our lives will go good again. So Jay Woodwolf, if you do want to try again to have a little conversation on Discord or something, we can certainly have a conversation together in Discord. Yay, good upgrade. Right, so I guess I shouldn't have been complaining about my internet service provider since it wasn't technically their fault. It was the equipment, which was pretty old equipment. It's just frustrating. It was power cycling, and obviously it was dropping frames and whatnot. But right now, the software I'm using, OBS, shows the number of frames dropped. 0 frames dropped. So I'm assuming for everyone it's smooth. It's green bars. I'm getting full frames per second. I haven't had to change the quality. So yeah, good stuff. Good stuff. But yeah, when people are trying to reconstruct, when they wrote a lot of these books, they went and found lore and they pieced it together. In some cases, they borrowed it from other places. One of the topics that I thought most interesting was elements. And I've done topics on the elements before because we have different elements depending on the region of the world that we're talking about. Specifically, I have a book, which is Introduction into Hermetics by Franz Barden, I think. And it's PDF. And Franz Barden talks about the tattvas, which are Indian elements, and it talks about 5 elements. The 5th element, spirit, being called Akasha, which is what a lot of people in polytheism today, Wiccans and witches alike, have a tendency to call the 5th element. Instead of calling it spirit, they'll call it Akasha. However, as I was looking through this, I typically equate that 5 elements, earth, air, fire, and water, to Indian Hinduism. And when I talk about the Chinese tradition, they have what's called the Wuxing, which is they have got like a cycle of creation and destruction. A lot of their martial arts philosophies, as well as feng shui, is based around these 5 elements and how they either produce each other or destroy each other. Now, they don't have earth, air, fire, and water. They have different 5 elements. They have earth, metal, wood, fire, and water. So it's different. It's a lot different. Did I do all this right? Is that the Wuxing? See, now I feel like, so yeah, so you have fire, which creates earth, and then from earth you have metal. Metal creates water, and water creates wood, and then wood fuels fire. So yeah, those are the 5 elements in the cycle of creation and destruction. I was doing it right. Sorry, just had to think about it for a minute. And then you have in Japan, you have Japanese 5 elements in, I don't remember what they call theirs, but they translate into earth, wind, water, fire, and the void. So that's very similar. It feels similar, wind versus air, and having... Wait a minute, no, they had gold, didn't they? Gold was one of their elements, too. Wind, fire, earth, gold, and void? I'm going to have to look it up. The Godai or something like that? It is Godai. Good. What are the 5 Godai? Earth, wind, fire, water, void. So where was gold? I thought one of them was gold. So I was right originally. I should trust myself. Interesting. Okay, yeah. Shui, what, it's no, see, this is the Chinese ones. Void, water, wind, fire, earth. And then the Chinese ones. I recognize these as being Chinese ones based upon the name Shui, which is Mandarin for water. Mu, Huo, which I know is fire. Tu, Jin. I don't know the other 3 by their Mandarin names. But anyway, my point is there's different constructions depending on which construction you're going off of. And this led me to have this impression of people are basically taking cultural traditions to build their own religion out of, but they're taking it out of Hinduism. But then I was having conversations, and one person had pointed out that there is a history in Europe, which is where, if Wicca is English, it's European, it's British. And people are like, it is. Hear me out. So witchcraft, right, and the word Wicca comes out of Old English, Anglo-Saxon, witcha and witche, which, look these up, etymology.com, origin of the word witch, which is why Gardner chose the word Wicca, because he was trying to go for this term that basically meant this wise individual. And they existed. There was a group called this. We have no connection with what they did or how they practiced. There's some Old English texts that make claims of what they might have done. But apparently, if you look at alchemy and some of the different stuff that is around some of the cultural traditions in England and Britain, you will find that they did have their own elements, but it wasn't 5 elements. It was 4 elements in many cases, or there were different elements like alchemical elements. So there is an elemental system based around the area where the witch or witcha, witche would have been. So there is some relevance there. But again, you're talking about tapping into cultural traditions to build modern spirituality and religion. I think they fall hand in hand. Earth, air, fire, metal, wood is one from Asia. Earth, air, fire, metal, wood. Yeah, so like the 2 that I know from Asia, like I said, is the Wusing, which is Chinese, and the Godai, which is Japanese. And the cycle of creation and destruction. If you look up the Wusing cycle. They actually draw it like a pentagram, because if you go around the circle, it creates each other. If you do the pentagram, that destroys each other. It's really fascinating. Here, let me just show it. Wusing. So in Mandarin, when you use English romanized characters, X means you pronounce it like an SH. So Wusing, if you want to look it up, look this up, is how we would type it in English. And you can also look up the Godai if you're interested as well. That's the Japanese 5 elements. Let me switch over to where I can show what's going on. So you can see here search results. So here is the Wusing chart, which shows the cycle of creation and destruction. So you have wood here. I don't know if you can see my mouse pointer or not. No, it doesn't show my mouse pointer. Anyway, the green shows wood. So if you go to the right, it says creates fire, because when you want fire, you have to have a source to burn. Fire creates earth because it turns into ash when you burn away the wood. And then earth goes around the circle again to metal, because you get metal out of ore in the earth. And then metal creates water, because when you have dew and moisture, it condenses on metal. And then water nourishes wood to make it grow. So that's your cycle of creation, is the circle. Now the pentagram, if you start out with wood, which is green, and go over across the top of the pentagram to yellow, which is earth, wood destroys earth, because trees uproot and separate earth as they grow. So it splits the earth. Earth, so yellow down to the, I guess, blue or black in the bottom left corner, destroys water, because earth will muddy the water and it's no longer pure and clean water. Water, jump up to fire, destroys fire because it extinguishes it. Fire will destroy metal because it melts it. You heat the metal and you destroy its strength and durability. And then metal destroys wood because you cut down trees with metal axes and implements. So this cycle of creation and destruction, this Wusing cycle, is fascinating, and the way the elements interact. But the biggest point, the biggest reason I'm bringing this up, is because of the different ways that cultures will approach developing their spirituality. So when you're looking at religion and spirituality, whether you're building your own or you're looking at traditions, they're heavily rooted in the culture that they come from. And that's the reason I'm bringing this up, is because of the cultural connection between religious practice, because the way that society looks at it. And in many cases, the society does not separate religion out. In America, we very much have religion and we put it off to the side, and then we have our cultural stuff and we try to keep them separate. Now, in the core culture of America is very much Abrahamic religion based. People talk about this all the time, whether it be morals and principles or even the nationally recognized holidays. Even though we're very accepting of religion, we have our core culture, which is based around a type of religion, which is interesting to think about. This kind of deeper history is fascinating. Does anyone remember Janet and Stuart Farrar and their Wiccan books? It was interesting how they put it together. Actually, I'm not familiar with either one of those authors. I'd be interested to know the title of their books. The elements with wood and metal make sense. Yeah. Hey, Dusty Dud, good to see you. You know, I jumped on early today at 1 o'clock instead of 2, and everyone's jumping in, and I'm glad the time change didn't affect you all. I just had some time now. I've got some things I'm doing later, so I wanted to stream while I was available. And again, it looks like perfectly stable streams, so hooray, hooray. Good times, good times. But yeah, talking about Scandinavia again, which is where I was talking about before I got into the elements, a lot of the stuff that people try to do today is they try to separate out religion from culture. It's one and the same. They didn't have religion which was separated independently from their culture in Scandinavia, not from what I can tell. Even in today in Iceland, it's very much ingrained in the culture. Like, not even everybody. So the main church in Iceland is Lutheran. There's like a huge church in Reykjavik, Iceland. It's where my grandparents were married when they met. It's a Lutheran church, but not everyone in the country says they're Lutheran. They converted as part of not fighting with the king of Norway? The king of Norway basically, Iceland's a settlement. People were not originally there. They mainly came from Norway, then some came in from Sweden and Denmark. So you have a mix of Scandinavian people in Iceland. But I believe it was still controlled by the Norwegian king. When the Norwegian king converted to Christianity, I know like Håkon the First is who moved Jol to be around the 25th. It was actually based upon the moons, the lunar cycle, and they wanted to move it to the solstice because of the Christian celebrations and stuff. But if you go with Jol and the old cycles, it would have fallen on, I believe it would have been the wolf moon. So if you look at the wolf full moon, sometime like in January would have been when Jol was actually celebrated. But that's, it's separate conversation and story there. But my point that I'm trying to get to is you had these regional leaders in Iceland called Gothi. And a lot of people today try to say they're Gothi because they're trying to call themselves a priest. So they're trying to tap into other people's cultural traditions. Here's the thing. You can't become a Gothi. And if you are into heathenry, some people call it Norse paganism. It's heathenry. I don't care what you call it. I'm not going to get into an argument of what you want to refer to it as. You might hear Norse paganism, Germanic paganism, heathenry, Norse heathenry. You might hear terms like Fjorn Sith. You might hear Ausatru or Asatru. Both are different. I can get into that too if you want. But everyone that's trying to rebuild this stuff, some of them are actually calling themselves Gothi. Can't do that. And here's why. Literally, Gothi were, if you think of a group of people as a tribe or a clan, because let's translate to English, right? So, and I don't know the Icelandic word for it. You have regional groups, and they were led by a political leader. So part of government, Gothi. Back in the day, before the conversion to Christianity, Gothi were responsible for everything with their people, which meant also religion. So they were sort of head of their hof or temple. You would translate that in the temple. So they were head of their group. So in a way, Gothi was kind of like a priest and a chieftain and a political leader and a governor, and a Gothi was many things. The Gothar. They used to have this large assembly of all the local Gothar in Iceland called the Althing. The Althing is it's like a sitting of a group of people. And they eventually stopped having Gothi, and now today in Iceland they call them Thingmen, which refers to an individual who would have the same position as what was used to be called the Gothi. Now there are groups like Ásatrúarfélagið in Iceland is a reconstruction group, and they call themselves Ásatrúarmenn, which someone who follows Ásatru. Ás is how you say there's like different clans and tribes of the deities. There's the Aesir, which are the Auses, Aus, single Aus. And then you have the Vanir, and you have the Jotnar. And the Jotnar are like the giants, these forces of chaos and destruction, the Vanir of the earth and the people and, you know, daily life. And the Aesir are the sky deities, the law, order, and they're above and more powerful than the rest, in a way. So Ausatru is faith in the Aesir. So it's a modern reconstruction. And I'm saying it in the Icelandic pronunciation, Ausatru, because that's how they do it in Iceland. In America, they tried to do it too, and they called it a Asatru because they didn't pronounce it with accents. And they tried to say, oh, it's an ancient thing. It's not. You're taking a modern reconstruction. So again, you're taking cultural stuff and trying to poach it. Same thing with Gothi. Gothi is literally a political leader that actually transitioned as the Gothi in Iceland transitioned to modern times. They became political people, and it was no longer as closely tied to spirituality. But even back then, a Gothi was not just a priest. So it's not something like, oh, I'm a Gothi now because I'm doing spirituality. So this is that cultural, looking at cultural versus religion. And when two of them are too close together, you start poaching off of people's culture. That's that cultural appropriation piece to a certain degree. And that was one of the many conversations that I can have around today's topic, is this distinction between cultural tradition and religious tradition. And at what point is it acceptable to do something? Another big topic. Well, let me read the comments, see if I missed anything. Nope, I didn't miss anything. Just people saying hi. Feel free to jump in the chat and share your thoughts. But this is why I'm saying, like, you know, people today, when they're wearing a Mjolnir, when they're calling themselves a Gothi, or even when we're looking at the elemental stuff, the elemental reconstruction, people are borrowing from other traditions and cultures to build something new. But how much of that can be pulled out of the cultural traditions of where they come from? I think the stuff like the elements is a little bit different, because that's not directly tied into words or government stuff. Like even in the 5 elements, people are saying earth, air, fire, water, and spirit typically. Some people do say Akasha, but most of them will call it spirit. I've heard ether too. Ether and Akasha are both closely associated with Hinduism, by the way. But if you look at the culture of where these come from, there are other names for the elements, and there are actual traditions that are outside Hinduism. So I don't know how much of borrowing from other cultures that is. But I think at the end of the day, as long as you're acknowledging the culture it comes from, and you're just trying to be the best you can be, it doesn't really matter. I don't think you owe it to other people to do it the way they want you to do it. It's just once you start stepping on other people's cultural and spiritual traditions, you start making people upset. With the Scandinavian stuff, people seem to think, oh, anybody can practice it. It's not a closed practice. It's like, technically, yeah, but if you're taking stuff out of people's culture, like names and words like Gothi, or people keep saying skål. Skål is saying cheers when you're drinking, skål. It's not how you greet and say hi to each other. It's an actual word used today. It actually means bowl, like actually like a bowl. And it's just, I don't know. There's this fine line. But also, if you're trying to reconstruct and rebuild and re-educate yourself, looking at cultural sources is the way to go. A lot of the people from the mid to early 1900s were looking at these old sources and stuff. Most recently, one of the things that I've been looking at, I stopped reading the Magus because I started reading my Dungeons and Dragons book to prepare for my most recent campaign for Curse of Strahd, because I like gaming. But I got sidetracked because I've been having a lot of conversations on TikTok about heathenry, sagas, and eddas, and we were talking about stuff there. And then I was like, you know, people are all about this hype wagon because of the Vikings TV show. I guarantee it. I would put money on it. They're shaving the sides of their heads. They're getting tattooed. None of this has anything to do with actual Vikings from the Viking era. None of it. It's modern fantasy bullshit. And why is it so popular? Because it's in media and TV shows. What don't you see as much? The Celtic stuff. What else do I like a lot? Some of the Celtic stuff. Irish, Welsh, Gaelic, like all that stuff. The Irish, Old Irish, Gaelga, which is their tongue and the way of speaking. Celtic is actually a language group. But looking at some of their stuff, and again, relying on translations, I've been looking up stuff, and there are sources you can check out. So I've been looking into Dusty Dud said, "Hey Blaze, was curious if you read the Yahweh book about Canaanite gods and Yahweh. If so, do you have any thoughts on it?" I have not. I have it listed as one of the books I eventually want to get to. It's just, it hasn't come up yet. But I do remember you sharing it. I appreciate it. So I don't have any thoughts on it yet for you. I unfortunately spend a lot of my time playing video games. A lot. Or other types of games like Dungeons and Dragons. And when I do read, so like right now I'm listening to the Dresden Files series again. I also watch TV with my wife a lot during the day after work. And I've been reading my Curse of Strahd book, so I have not gotten to that book yet. The Farrars tried to incorporate Irish and Welsh into Buckland-style Wiccan system. I would not be surprised. Okay, cool. I was just curious. Yeah, no problem. I don't mind you bringing it up, and sorry I haven't gotten to it yet, but it might be a while, so feel free to bring it up as much as you want, and just bear with me when I say, nope, I haven't gotten to it yet. Just, I'm not trying to dismiss it. It's just I have a stack of books to read, including a whole bunch of new ones that I've recently purchased. One of them that I'm going to purchase on top of it, because I want to buy a physical copy of this book, is I've been looking at the Book of Invasions. So this is an Irish tale, and it's called Liber Galbala Erin. I don't speak Gaeilge, and the occasional word I know in Gaeilge I do not pronounce very well, but it translates into the Book of the Takings of Ireland, also known as the Book of Invasions. And this reviews some of the stories and the history behind that, which to me holds special relevance to me. Where do you order your books from? Amazon, typically. It depends on the book I'm going for. I used to use Azure Green a lot, and I still think Azure Green is a great source to buy some of the books, but I've been finding most of them on Amazon or half-price books if I want to. I like to buy my books new, so I like to buy them off of Amazon. Where do you order your books from? Buckland. Cool. So the reason I'm like looking at this is it talks about, so this is one of the ways that some of the cultural stuff has been kept alive. And Ireland is very, very interesting because I think the core of what makes something religious to a culture remains. And I've mentioned this before too. I feel like it transitions with the culture. So the Irish, like many other cultures, don't give up their traditions. They instead shift them. And in the Book of Invasions, it talks about the history, and it basically kept alive some of the heroes and the deities from old pagan Ireland and transitioned them into Christian Ireland. And they go back and forth. So like this first section here, right? If you go the very, very top section there, there's like a list of like an index there, and it's like purple and blue, and it says 01-13 biblical history. It starts with a piece of the Bible. So if you click on this, it actually takes you to a section of the Bible itself, talking about God made heaven and earth at the first. This is one of the ways, and yeah, so like I said, some of this you're gonna have to trust on the translation on some of this stuff, unless you want to go learn the language and translate it yourself, which would be awesome. But yeah, it's gonna straight up have biblical text here. This is one of the ways to protect it. You start with biblical text, then people don't want to read into it or look into it too much. But it goes to the different people that came to Ireland, and it jumps around in time. But it also talks about the Tuatha De Danann, and anyone who's been following my channel for any length of time knows that the main deity I have had closest to my heart, some people call it a patron, some people, I don't care what you call it, the main deity that I've always been all for since I was, how old was I? 17, is Brigid. Brigid is one of the Tuatha De Danann, and in here you can find Brigid. Wait a minute. Should be under here. They call her something else? Maybe it's a different section, but I thought it was under the Tuatha De Danann. Interesting. Might be under a different section. I thought it would be under the Tuatha De Danann, but it's still interesting to hear about the Tuatha De Danann coming here. But she's one of the two Danann, which is why I wanted to read in and look and research some of this stuff here specifically. I know it mentions, so you've heard of the holiday Lunasan. Lu. Lu is one of the deities that's written about in here, and his part in taking of Ireland and becoming king and his magic spear. And it talks about all this stuff, and it writes them as if they're not deities, but it's clear that they are deities. Even talks about them going into the underground and becoming like greater she, which is like, the Fae, she. The A-she, yeah, the greater Fae, I think, is the way it's pronounced, is A-she. It looks interesting on the spelling of it, but yeah, it's still interesting. I haven't gotten through the whole thing, but it's still something that caught my interest and I wanted to look through, and I thought you all might be interested in it too, because like I said, we just don't talk a lot about some of the Celtic sources and history and stuff, so I figured I would definitely share some of this as well. So anyway, very, very, very interesting to be able to read some of the old stories, and I highly recommend that if you're looking at any sort of reconstruction in any way, shape, or form, that you should look at the actual sources and origin of where it comes from, right? If you are interested in witchcraft, go to England, UK, look at some of the Anglo-Saxon type stuff. If you are interested in Druidry, look at Gaul, which is now France. You can look at Welsh traditions and Irish traditions. If you are interested in some of the Viking-like stuff, look at Scandinavia, look at Iceland, look at Denmark, look at Uppsala, Sweden, and some of the things that they have. They have archaeology to support some of this stuff. There's a lot of writers who want to fill in holes and come up with their own version, and I'm getting sick of it. I like when they come up with their own stuff, as long as they tell you it's their own stuff and it's new. I've had these conversations like with Druids. Love Druids. And why is it popular? Why did I like Druids? Because I think what was my first introduction to Druids? Might have been Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition. But it got me looking and thinking about this stuff. And then I saw Druids in video games and stories. I'm like, this is cool. So I got into it. Just like anyone else, I get inspired by fiction. So I wanted to explore it. And then you start finding out all this stuff like, oh my goodness, we don't know what they used to do. But then we also find out they didn't call themselves Druids. That's what we call them. If you talk about the ancient Druids who are dead and gone, you can read about them in Julius Caesar's Gallic Wars. Julius Caesar had firsthand experience observing them and wrote down about them. So we have little glimpses into the past. They're dead and gone. The Druids of today, the word itself, you can look up the origin of the word Druid. I mean, it comes from a connection of a whole bunch of different words, but in Old Gaelga or some of the old Celtic languages, there was not a word Druid. That is a modern word. And the words that it came from, and including a French word, and you can, again, look up the etymology behind the word Druid, comes from, I believe, the 15th century or something like that. Etymology.com. I know not a lot of people like the site. I don't care. I like it. It's a kiss my butt. If you don't like it, find your own site. Find other stuff, Botanica or anything else. If you don't trust the site, don't use the site. Darn it. Now it's going to go to the wrong window on me just to drive me nuts. It's going to go to my other one here. But anyway, I'll post it here. I'll post it and read it to you. Etymology. One of the order of the priest among the ancient Celts of Gaul, Britain, and Ireland. 1560s. From French, druid, from 16th century. Not 15th century, 16th century. And it comes from all these different words which built into it and what its origin and original practices could have been. Notice, interestingly enough, Britain. So when people compare and they say that witchcraft and druidry, or Wicca and druidry, are so similar, of course they are. They come from a similar area. They're going to have similar practices. Just like if you look at the Germanic tribes and the northern Norse Scandinavian tribes, there's going to be similarities because, again, they're very close. They're right next to each other. You can see the same thing when you look at some of the revival reconstruction stuff that is part of the Slavic traditions. If you look at Poland and you compare that to Czechoslovakia, or Czech and Slovakia, since I don't, sometimes they're together, sometimes they break apart, but they're Slavic, so there's going to be some influences and some similarities. Blaze, do you research the Finns? I think it's Semi people. I read the ancient Norse communicated with them a lot, and they stayed around into the 1800s. I'm new to learning about the Semi. Not a lot. There is one story which talks about... So Some people like to take Seder, and they'll say Seder. It's not. It's like a th. Seder, and they'll say, "Oh, that's Norse magic." And it's a specific type of practice. So you had this group called the Volva, and they have in one of the sagas, Eric the Red saga. I might need to check my sources. I believe it's Eric the Red saga. They have this Volva come in, and they describe her wearing like cat skin and cat skin gloves, and basically she's covered in animal fur. And they mention like what she was eating, and I can't remember exactly what she was eating, but it was like raw and bloody or something. And she was practicing Seder, and she asked for local women who knew the songs. Again, talking about women practicing it because they were looking for women practicing it. But they mentioned that Volva might have been one of the Semi tribe. And they equate a lot of the different types of magical practices in that particular saga to be coming from the Semi people. That's the only thing I know of that I've run across, but that's about it. So no, I don't have a lot of knowledge of it, but I have at least heard mention of them. In fact, I think Jackson Crawford has a really good video on the Volva that talks about the Semi too. Let me see if I can get you that link real quick. Notice I'm always like, hey, check out this link, check out this book. Why? Because we learn from somewhere. So let's share sources. Let's talk about it. I can tell you my interpretation, but I'm trying to remember. Let's go back to the original source, even if it's another person, and let's hear what they have to say and come up with our own opinion. And then have a conversation of what we heard. What did we hear when we read that text? Or heard that person speak in a video? Or read their book? You know, whatever the case may be. What did we interpret it as? What does it mean to us? This is the type of conversation I think is productive. And that's one of the main focuses of my channel. Awesome that you brought that up, Dusty Dead, by the way. Yeah, I'm under Scandinavia. So would it be under, it'd be under magic, which I say magic is Fjolkingi, by the way. Magic. Okay, and then we're watching. Let's see. Golder, Spau, Seder, Fjolkingi. Script mention AMD Animus Saga. Fifth skriver at Hever Meth Fjolkingi. Yeah, this is the mention in that saga, but I know Crawford did a video on it too, and that's what I'm interested in, is seeing Crawford's video on it. That's what I wanted to share with you. It's here on YouTube, by the way. I know he was standing out on a hill, and he was talking about, might be this first one. No, it's studying European prophets. Oh, Ragnarok. Ah!
Hi, I'm More Specialist Dr. Jack. Omni animante om super blue Siga, which means correct. To any word English which. One saga related to the majority Scandinavian.
Sami is what he calls them, so maybe we're talking about something different. I'm going to clip this at the, I'm going to give you timestamps. When you click this link, no, Fjolkingi. It's like, it's much knowing or well-versed, or you have a lot of knowledge into something. So here is the Old Norse Fjolkingi. And here is the modern Icelandic. That's the modern Icelandic Fjolkingi. That's what I would, if I was going to translate something that basically means magic, it'd be Fjolkingi. And I actually interestingly enough, so there's a... See, I don't want to call him out. I'm not trying to get in an argument with him. There is another individual who I greatly respect who's very scholarly in his approach, and he studies philology, Old Norse philology on his own. He's like a lay scholar. And he will say that, well, Ursula Dronka translates Seidr as magic. And I said, I don't care. Ursula Dronka is a great translator, understands language, fine. I don't care. But you can't take something like Seidr and reduce it to magic when it's a specific practice, because what you are doing is you are being reductive and dismissive about what Seidr is if you just generalize it. And a lot of people do that who do not believe in or buy into spirituality or magic. They'll try to take it, it's all the same thing. Oh, Volva, that's basically a witch. No, it's not. Yes, it is. It's pretty much the same thing. They both do magic. I'm like, no, it's not. So you're telling me then somebody who practices modern witchcraft can just call themselves a vulva? Well, no, because if it's the same thing, they can use whatever word they want. It's not the same thing. It's culturally different. It's practically different. It's historically different. It's different. And the same thing is true for Seidr. Fjorkingi is that broader understanding of stuff. Seidr, Utisetta, Spau, Golder, all of these, Taufer, all of these are different types of practices that would fall under an umbrella term of magic. And I go back and forth and argue, and this individual just doesn't see it my way. But then he'll argue that Viking doesn't mean raider. And I'm like, okay, I'm on board with you. Saying a Viking is a raider or a pirate, no, but it's about as close as Volva is to witch. They're distinctly different. Because again, you need to look at the culture of where it comes from. And this is what a lot of people do. They take these cultural words and they use it to give the flair or the appearance because of what they're interested in, versus seeing the actual significance in that culture of that word, individual person, and their experience. Blaze, can you do a quick overview of the difference between the sagas? I assume you mean Halvamau and the Eddas. Also, how many sagas are there? Sure. So saga itself literally translates into story. So when you say saga, you're saying story. Eddas is a particular group of sagas that were written down. So there's the prose Edda and the poetic Edda, which is a group that was written down and translated by Snorri Sturluson. There's a couple other different versions. So back in the day, you had a skald, which is a type of poet. This would be similar. Notice I'm saying similar because they're not the same because of the cultural differences. This would be similar to a bard would be in Druidry. It's somebody who knew the stories and could perform them and recite them out loud. They knew the verse, that they could perform them. Snorri Sturluson, even though a Christian, his father was pagan. We know this based upon some historical accounts and some of the lawyer stuff. But he, as a skald, he would have tried to provide these stories as best he could from word of mouth. So they passed these stories by word of mouth. He wrote down the Eddas for everyone to use. Things not inside the Eddas would then have different sagas, like sagas of Icelanders and stuff. As an example, Eet Skallagrimsson, who I'm actually descended from, has his own saga, the saga of Eet Skallagrimsson, saga of Eric the Red. These are individual stories about individuals that don't exist in the prose or poetic Eddas. So Eddas is a group and collection of specific sagas, and you have separate sagas. The Halvamau is a poem in the poetic Edda. It exists inside of it. If you go to the prose Edda or the poetic Edda, if you go to the Edda that Snorri Sturluson did, the Halvamau is inside of there. It's in part of that collection, and there's a couple different collection of stories, if that helps. I meant so. Okay, so we were talking about the same. Great. But if you look at that video by Jackson Crawford, that mention is the only mention I know of the Salmi people. And with the accent he had over the A, I think there was an accent over the A. It would be pronounced ow. So it'd be Salmi, if I'm understanding it properly. But yeah, so hopefully that answers your question. Does that help? So, like in the Eddas, there's the poetic Edda, 13th century Snorri Sturluson. And then there's the prose Edda, Snorri Sturluson, 1200 CE. I don't know why one says 13th century. So who wrote the original one then? Or was it the prose a translation of the poetic? Inside the Eddas, you have value spa, which is like, spow is like fortune telling and seeing the future. Value would be from a volva. So a volva is fortune telling. Some people say it's the way they'll translate it, because a lot of people do translate volva to mean witch. I don't. But because people do, they'll say it is the prophecy of the witch, is the way they'll take value spa. That's how they'll translate it. Grimmismaul and Vaftru Nismaul, Halvamaul, Rigstula, Lokasena are all inside the. Those are all Eddas. All of those are Eddas. So they're like collections of stories. Then there's the sagas like Laxandila saga, Ornixinga saga, Volsung saga, or the saga of the Volsungs, the saga of Rolf Kraki, saga of Ragnar Lothbrok and his sons, Aet saga, which I mentioned, Niel saga, the saga of Gisli Sirgson, the saga of Grettir the Strong, and yeah, so there's like, yeah, it's groupings of stories. And then according to sonsofvikings.com, Edda, either of two 13th century Icelandic books, the older Poetic Edda and the younger Prose Edda, a handbook to Icelandic poetry by Snorri Sturluson. The Eddas are the chief source of Scandinavian mythology. So Edda is literally a book, and there's the poetic, and then there's the prose, which Snorri did. So Snorri did the prose. And then the sagas, which I told you means story. One of many long stories of heroic achievement focusing on Norse, Icelandic, and Viking-related history and folklore recorded in Iceland during the 12th and 13th centuries. So I'll give you that link too. There you go. Who wrote the Poetic Edda? Because I thought it was... I should know this, but I don't, so I'm going to look it up. Codex Regius. Yeah, that's another collection. I've heard of that one before. Poetic Edda is the modern name for an untitled collection of Old Norse anonymous narrative poems in alliterative verse. It is distinct and closely related to the Prose Edda. Although both works are seminal to the study of Old Norse poetry, several versions of the Poetic Edda exists. Notably is the medieval Icelandic manuscript Codex Regius, which contains 31 poems. The Codex Regius is arguably the most important extant source of Norse mythology and Germanic hero legends since the early 19th century. It had powerful influence on Scandinavian literature. But it doesn't, and yeah, and as I've mentioned before, poets who have acknowledged their debt to the Codex Regius include blah 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 J.R.R. Tolkien. There's a group of them. The Codex Regius was written during the 13th century, but nothing was known of its whereabouts until the 1643, when it came in the possession of Brynjolfur Sveisen, the Bishop of Skjoltholt at the time, and versions of the Prose Edda were known in Iceland, but scholars speculated that there was once another Edda, an Elder Edda, which contained the pagan poems that Snorri quotes in his Prose Edda. Okay, so Snorri did the prose, and I guess the Codex Regius, the Poetic Edda, is an older version, and we don't know where it came from. That's good to know. So I'm going to change my notes here since I didn't have my notes right. Paste, keep text only. Okay, sorry. Got sidetracked. Did you ask the story? And if I don't have an answer for you, I'll try to look it up or tell you I don't know. But yeah, there we go. And we're at our hour mark. So is Norse a part of Germanic? In a way. So what you have is you have the Germanic tribes. And then the Norse refers to Norway So the Norse people are the Norwegians. People try to apply it to everyone north of Germania. So the Germanic tribes had a northern region, which would be like Denmark and Norway and Sweden. So when you typically hear Norse, it's something that we do today to separate the break off of the Germanic traditions from the Norse traditions. You'll see distinct differences in how names are pronounced, but you'll have similar lore. An example of that would be in Old Norse, we would say Odin, not Odin, Odin. And in Germania, they would have said Wotan. And I thought it would be Voten because in German, V's, W's sound like V. Like they wouldn't say Volkswagen, it'd be Volkswagen in German. It's interesting, but yeah, that's not the case with Wotan. Apparently, they would still pronounce the W, which I thought is interesting. But yeah, there's a little bit difference on the names and stuff, but there's a lot of similarities between Germanic and Norse tradition. The Germanic traditions are much, much older. I have a timeline I put together based upon a couple of books, and I think there's a person who put it together too. So basically, in 200 CE, there was a split in Old paganism from Germanic paganism to Norse paganism in the north, which we call Scandinavia. Same root, but still different. 500 BCE, so CE refers to Common Era. Because I'm not Christian, I do not use the term AD, which is Anno Domini. It's Latin for Year of Our Lord. I'm not going to use that. I use CE for Common Era, which they use scientifically. BCE is before Common Era. So BC before Christ, AD Anno Domini, or BCE and CE. So you understand what I mean. 500 BCE Iron Age started. This is where they started having more evidence because iron held up better than copper. So from 10,000 BCE to 500 BCE, we don't have a lot of information of the time period in there because we don't have a lot of surviving relics. But most people consider the origins of Germanic paganism to be considered 10,000 BCE. So you have these tribal traditions back to 10,000. We don't know how much they changed or what all they did. But around 500 BCE in the Iron Age, we have evidence of Germanic paganism. 200 CE. So this would be 700 years later. Okay, so 500 BCE, we have some old artifacts from archaeology. 200 CE, because remember, before Common Era, then Common Era. So the 200 Common Era, you have to add the 500 before the Common Era. That's 700-year difference. 200 CE, Norse paganism is split off. We base this upon the writings of Tacitus. He had a writing book called Germania. So based upon the writing of Germania, we are considering society, people who look into this stuff, considered Norse paganism to be its own thing based upon Tacitus. And you can look him up, by the way. Tacitus is Germania. Uh, 476 CE, Rome falls and the Dark Ages start. 793 CE, we have the raiding of Lindisfarne, and most people consider 793 to be the beginning of the Viking era. In 900 CE, Denmark converts to Christianity. 1000 CE, Iceland converts to Christianity. I actually know how that happened too. They actually had the Norwegian king threatening them, telling them they needed to convert. And the Gothi had an Althing, and in the Althing they all discussed. So the elder Gothi decided to do what's called utiseta, which is literally translates to sitting outside, and basically prayed to his gods, to the Aesir, the Vanir, and asked them for guidance and wisdom. And he came back to the Althing and told the other Gothi that they would convert Iceland to Christianity to stop further bloodshed to protect the people of Iceland. Dead serious. You can look this up. That's 1000 CE. 1020 CE, Norway converts to Christianity. And then 1066 CE, Sweden converts, and that's considered to be the end of the Viking era. 200 years later, we have a dead period where we have no idea what survived or what people were still practicing, because we see laws that appear in Iceland that make it illegal to practice different forms of Icelandic magic. And you can look up those laws. And they would persecute them for practicing stuff. And eventually they relieved some of those laws, and it was allowed to practice paganism in private in your own home. And that's why in Iceland today they still have a lot of traditions that seem very paganistic in nature. They don't seem very Christian. They even have a story of the Huldufólk, which is the hidden people, and they have it relating, and I can show you a documentary story of someone in Iceland telling you the story of the Huldufólk. And basically God came down to visit Adam and Eve and all their children, but Adam and Eve, like half their children were dirty and didn't clean up for God's to come, so they told them to hide because they were embarrassed by them. When God came and said, "Is this all your children?" they said yes, and lied. And he said, "Well, since you want to hide some of your children from me, they'll be hidden from everyone." And he cursed them to be hidden, and they became the hidden people, which is like elves, gnomes, dwarves, fairies, and stuff. So they're supposed to be the children of Adam and Eve, according to this one version of the story. So it's interesting how they keep their traditional folklore alive, but they incorporate Christian ideology behind it and mythology to merge Christian mythology with their own mythology. It's interesting. 1270 CE, the Poetic Edda is written by Snorri Sturluson. So yeah, much, much longer. And then we have 1800 CE, the Romantic era, where there's a re-interest in the old faith. So in 1800 CE, people started to get interested and start writing down stuff. And this is like, I mean, you'll start seeing a whole bunch of different books and stuff come out of Iceland. Iceland loves to write books, by the way. 1900 CE, interest in digging up artifacts and ships, anything relating to the Viking era and the Viking Age. 1930 to 1935, the Nazis become very interested in history, language, and symbols, which is where you have like the SS was using like 2 runic symbols to symbolize it. You have the swastika is actually looks very similar to an actual Old Norse symbol that has nothing to do with like Hitler was interested in a lot of that stuff, any of the arcane magical stuff. So he took a lot of the old symbols and used some of their symbology, which is why some of the Odinic Rite, I don't know if Odinic Rite is specifically, but some of them are in fact neo-Nazis. Some of them. Not all of them, but that's where you get the people arguing over whether or not Norse pagans are this or that, because there was a group that was very much towards that ideology, which is interesting and scary. 1970 CE, Ásatrú is created in Iceland. That's where we get the Ásatrú Felagith. 1990 CE to about 700 Icelanders are considered Ásatrú. So 700 people. 2015, there's about 2,400 Icelanders. 2017, 3,683 Icelanders, about 1% of the country. 2019 CE, 20,000 Americans start to follow the old gods, so it starts to become popular in America. And then 2020, which is about 4 years ago, was when I, in 2020, 4 years ago, is when I found a video of someone detailing out the history of it, which was very interesting. And I have some of the books that this individual mentions. And if you would like to, I'm actually going to go ahead and give him a shout out, and I'm going to share the video where he talks about a lot of this. Very fascinating. Check that out. Watch that video. Tell him Blaze said hi. He doesn't know who I am, but tell him I said hi anyway. I'm still confused, kind of confused on the Celtic and Germanic areas. Was England Celtic or Germanic? Neither. They were Anglo-Saxon. They were kind of in between. So they were neighbors, and they were all their own little thing. And there was regions. So when you talk about the word Celtic, Celtic is a language group. And there's like Northern Celtic and Southern Celtic, and there's all these different groups that spoke different types of languages. Old English, Anglo-Saxon language, was its own language. Anglo-Saxons were much closer to the Germanic languages. So parts of England and Britain would have been Germanic-like, just like parts of it would have been Celtic-like. And remember, they were constantly warring and moving and shifting those borders. So what I would advise you to do is, if you look up maps on the old Celtic tribes and where they lived, compare that to where the old Germanic tribes lived, then compare that to where the old Anglo-Saxon tribes lived, and you will see a shift. This is also why people are so mixed on culture, language, traditions, and even generalized features of the face and facial structure in those regions, there'll be a blend. And the further you get away from the areas, like if you get on a border, you go further in the UK, the people who have not mixed and moved around, they have a very distinctive look. And if you move further over to like France, they'll have a very distinctive look. The closer you get together, there would be more facial bone structure similarities, height, weight, typical eye color, hair color. You'll start seeing similarities the closer you get to those borders, because when people meet, they're humans, they're going to have offspring, and it's going to mix characteristics and traits from those different regions. Same thing is true of language and religion. People are going to trade ideas, have conversations, and discuss. So there'll be an intermingling. That's my understanding of it. I hope that helps. What did I miss? Oh, I jumped past a comment. Let me jump back up. So Fadista said, really interesting to see how these Nordic texts have influenced Western culture through literature. It wasn't all Greek and Roman. Fact. Tacticus, I'm still kind of confused. What kind of burials did the old pagan Norse have? Was it in mounds or with any special markers? So it depends on the region. One of the things, so a lot of people like to say a Viking funeral, they put them in a longboat, they put it out to sea and set it on fire. That wasn't done. That's a movie theatrical thing. What they would actually do is do burials. They would do burial mounds. They would fill it with grave goods. Typically, they'll actually, if someone was really wealthy and noble, they would bury a boat filled with goods and put the body with weapons in the boat and bury that. And they've dug up these graves with people in boats. If they weren't really wealthy, they wouldn't have an entire boat buried with them. They would just be buried by themselves. If they were a warrior, they would be buried with their weapons. And if they weren't, they would just be buried with personal effects, whether that be combs and brushes or things that they had in life that meant a lot to them. So it depends. Some cases too, thralls, which basically it's like a slave, but a thrall would be sometimes buried with who they were responsible, like who was responsible for them, who had control over them. I think the Wales was Celtic, I think. Yes. Welsh are definitely Celtic. A lot of so have you heard of Crwydwen and Taliesin? Taliesin was a Welsh bard. Iolo Morganlug, who is part of why we have the revival Druidry we have today from about 300 years ago, was a Welsh bard. Now, interestingly enough, the Druids started out as Christian. They didn't start becoming pagan Druids till about 100 years ago, roughly. We have about a 300-year-old history with revival Druidry and Druidism. They are different. In fact, that Druidism typically refers to a religious revival movement, where Druidry refers to a spiritual revival movement. Druidry is typically associated with what Ross Nichols did. Ross Nichols is associated with the order of bards, ovates, and druids, whereas Druidism is usually religion-based, and you have different groups. One of the main ones that I usually think of when I think of Druidism would be Isaac Bonowitz, who started the ADF, Enfant Drain, or Druid Fellowship. Most of my genetics are the British Isles and West Europe, but I have about 23% Nordic heritage, especially Swedish, all via the British Isles. Very mixed culture there. Oh, yeah. The Scandinavians were the worst. Like, my mom, as I'd mentioned, she is half Icelandic. Her mother and my grandma, all the way back from that side of the family, born and raised in Iceland. My mom was born in Iceland. Some of her siblings were born in Iceland, and they came to America when she was like baby. I think my oldest uncle was 5. No, my oldest aunt, actually, she came over when she was like 18 or 19. But my uncle, who grew up with my mom, he came over when he was about 5. I think 4 or 5. But anyway, my point is, like, real close connection there. But my mom did a DNA test. Now my grandfather, her father, his family came from Czech. Now he was born here, but his side came from Czech. And when my mom did a DNA test, she was under the impression that it would be like half Czech, half Icelandic, but she had tons of stuff in there, including even Irish and stuff. The thing is, especially Icelanders, but the people from the Viking era moved around and raided. In fact, Dublin in Ireland is a Viking settlement. So it is not uncommon to have anyone who has Scandinavian heritage to be very mixed ethnically with a lot of the different groups in the regions because they moved around. They sailed, they did raids, they did trading, they did settlements. They were like all over the place. That was very common. And when you brought back people and goods from your raids, sometimes those people would be brought back and they'd marry into the culture sometimes. So yeah, no, it's not uncommon to have a lot of mix up in there, big time. So similar burials as Celtic with the chariots, etc. Yes, yes. 13/12/1987. Yeah, Justin Kemp, I'm not sure what you're typing. So I'm not sure if you were typing to participate, if you're doing some form of a code. I apologize, I don't know what that means. My great grandpa was Norwegian American and great grandma was German American. It's the thrall? Okay. Interesting. Yeah, I always find it fascinating. I'm 100% mutt. Uh, I say that affectionately because how diverse my grandparents were from where they came from, where they grew up, where they were born. Some people will say where you're born is what you are. I was born and raised in America. I'm an American. Yeah, yeah. And I'm proud to be an American. But I'm also proud of the heritage of where my people came from. And I love cultural stuff. That's, it's one of the reasons why I find a lot of stuff so fascinating. Some people will say that what you are culturally speaking is pretty much the last 5 generations. And here's the thing. I grew up with cultural traditions from where my grandparents came from. That influenced my upbringing. So yes, even though I'm an American, I grew up with food and traditions and practices that come from different cultures that are distinctly unique. And I'm proud of those traditions. So I'm not like my wife. My wife's Polish. My wife's Polish. She was born here too, but her dad immigrated from Poland. Her mom was born in Germany, but her family, so her grandparents, born and raised in Poland, moved to Germany where her mom was born, and then they came here to the States. So they have a huge influence from their Polish tradition, their cuisine, their culture. They even speak the language, and even some of the boxes and the Polish boxes and stuff that they have, and some of their artwork and things. It's very, very ethnically Slavic Polish. So they are Poles. They are 100% Poles for sure. My dad's side is Dutch and Welsh origins. Nice. Mutt. It's good to be mixed. Yeah, I don't mind. Like I said, I like where my family comes from. It makes me unique. If you think about what it took to bring you into this world and all the people that had to have met and crossed paths, I'm uniquely me today because of what happened before. So I like to appreciate where that comes from. And I've talked about it before. I'll just bring it up again since we're talking about it. So my mom was born in Iceland. My grandma, 100% Icelander. Now, if you go back far enough, they came over from Norway and came over to Iceland, but they were in Iceland for like hundreds of years. So it's like, yeah, they're Icelanders. My mom's dad was born here in the United States. He fought in World War II. He was a navigator bombardier for the U.S., and he was stationed at a base in Iceland, which is how he met my grandma. And his parents came over from Czech. Now, whenever I asked him about our heritage, he always told me we're American. He never wanted to talk about the past. I know very little about my Czech side, and I don't have a lot of cultural influence from the Czech side. Iceland's another story. I got a lot of Icelandic cuisine and food growing up and traditions. Even some of the things we did around the holidays and stuff was all Icelandic based, I found out later in life. So I had some really cool influences, including scaring the crap out of me with gorilla. Me and my brothers and my cousins, if you didn't behave, gorilla would come take you in a sack and eat you. Yeah, we had some pictures of gorilla, which I miss. I wish we still had those because I can't find them online anymore. So we had some really cool stories that we grew up with because of the Icelandic influence. And I got to meet my Longafi, which would be great grandfather. He had come to America from Iceland on a visit, and it was neat to meet them. And even now I got to meet some of my family from Iceland, which is pretty cool. My dad's side, now my dad was born and raised here. His mother was born here as well, my grandma. But my grandma's sister and her parents immigrated from Italy. And we grew up with Italian food and cuisine and stuff. And I don't remember them talking Italian when I was younger. I just remember a lot of the food and the way that Europeans are when they have family over. There's a distinctness to it that was very uniquely that side of the family on my dad's side. And my dad's dad was born and raised here. But when you go back further to his parents and stuff, you had, let's see, I think my great-grandfather was also born here, but his parents came from Germany. And then my great-grandma came from Ireland. So German, Irish, and Italian from my dad. And then for my mom, Czech and Icelandic. So 5 different, very distinct ethnicities with very distinct cultural stuff, languages, and cuisines had influenced me. So, yeah, that's why I say I'm a mutt. 5 different groups came together to make me who I am today. Whole half of my family is Italian, but I'm not blood related. Interesting. So half of your family, so I guess you were adopted, potentially? So you at least grew up with the Italian cuisine then, and maybe even some of the language. That's pretty cool. Yeah, I found out, and I didn't know this, my great-grandfather he came and built a house, and he was buried in a cemetery, and I actually moved into the same city, and I did not know. I did not move here knowing that, and I found that out later. Like, the house he built is like a couple streets away. I had no clue, and I found it out later in life, which I thought was pretty wild. Just grandfather who remarried. Oh, okay, I got you. Think of how strong all of our ancestors were or would not be here. The sheer resilience of them all, right? Pretty cool to have all those sources. This is maybe why you strive for cohesion and respect for all traditions. It is. Because I don't know. I think my parents and the way I was raised really instilled a lot of this mentality to me. I mean, even my father, he used to do all sorts of research. He was actually a Freemason. I actually have his Masonic Bible over here. He's no longer with us. He passed away. But he used to get into all sorts of different type of research of different types of spiritualities and faiths and traditions and stuff. And even my mom did that. She had a lot of different influences on things that she did. And we had like family traditions. Like I had one of my mom's aunts or great aunts used to have you drink out of a teacup, and she would look in the teacup and read and tell you your fortune. And then I've had family members who supposedly had prophetic dreams. And one of the folks in Iceland married a priest, an Icelandic priest, and he was actually burned at the stake for practicing witchcraft. So it's like there's these neat family traditions and stories that you pass down and learn about, and then you ask, why did they used to do this, or what did they get into, and finding about what your family did and how they came to be. It's I don't know, it's just fascinating. That's why I research the ones that I do. Now I also get into Taoism because I like martial arts. I grew up with Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee has always been one of my idols. I have no connection with China whatsoever, but I do love Taoism, and I do love some of the Chinese martial arts. So it is possible for me to research something I have no connection with. But when I research Icelandic traditions, sagas, cultures, and eddas, or try to learn the language, to me, that's like coming home. That's like connecting with my family for me. When I look into the Irish stuff, when I look into Druid stuff, now some of it's Irish, some of it's Welsh. A lot of the stuff, like I said, was influenced by the Welsh Iolo Morganlug, Obad, or Bards, Ovates, and Druids. So, I mean, I have other influences, and I do take from other cultures, but I at least try to see and understand the culture they come from and pay homage to that. So when I talk about the Wu Sing, I'm telling you, that's a Chinese tradition. I'm not trying to pretend the Wu Sing stuff is part of Druidry, right? It's like I want to know what culturally built what I'm trying to do. I'm going to do what I want to do. I don't care if people like it or not. This is my life and it's my business. But If I'm going to take the time to talk to you all on a camera here on the internet and leave a video out for people to watch for who knows how many years to come, I could die and these videos might still be up one day. But I want to leave that information, those links, those references, those sources, and I want to pay homage to where I learned that from. And I think that's important to not only acknowledge and honor where things come from, but give you all the opportunity to deep dive it further. I think it's important. Everyone's different, though. Does Elysium make any sense to anyone here? The only thing I know about Elysium is a movie. I've seen a movie called Elysium. On the vid, she was surprised. Wait, I missed a few things here. Pretty cool to have all this. I seen a Norwegian lady take a DNA test, and she had a lot of Scottish ancestry. It was on YouTube. Nice. Yeah, I did a DNA test as well. On the vid, she was surprised. Does Elysium make any sense to anyone here? Yeah, just the movie Elysium. That's the only reference I know to that word or name. I've never seen it otherwise. What significance does that word have to you? Let's see. Where is... See, I did 2 different DNA things. I did... I think Ancestry.com had a DNA thing. And I also did 23andMe. This is my mom's ancestry one. Here's mine. I think I'm still logged in. Yeah. Yeah, here's my stuff. DNA. That's what I wanted to see. And it slightly updates every so often, right? Because the results they do is based upon who puts into the database. So a lot of people complain about it. I don't care. I think it's awesome. I love it. So, all right. So according to Ancestry.com, I am 24% Irish, mainly from the Connacht region of Ireland. I am 18% Eastern European and Russian, mostly from the Slovakia and Hungary region, like I mentioned, Slovakia, the Czech side. I'm 13% Sweden and Denmark, 11% Norway, which would be from the Icelandic side, 10% Northern Italy, 8% Southern Italy, 6% Germanic Europe, 4% France, 2% England and northwestern Europe, 2% Wales, and 2% Scotland. So, like I said, kind of a mutt. Those are the regions my DNA come from. 23andMe. I probably need to sign into this. Let's see what they say. Sign in. Okay. It's right here. What email address did I use? I've got 2 email addresses. Well, I got a couple email addresses, but there's 2 email addresses I might have used. Verification code. Well, at least it's protecting my information, so not everybody can get to it, right? So if somebody tried to hack my stuff. Who would want to hack my stuff? But you never know, right? You never know. I got to sign into my email. Kind of curious now. I like talking about this stuff, as you can tell. Blinded by the light. Here it is. Okay. Copy that. Verification code. Remember me. Remember me when I'm dead. Heyo. Okay, we're here. Ancestry report. So according to 23andMe, all right, I'm 99.6% European, 49.6% Northwestern European, so British and Irish 15%, Scandinavian 13%, French and German 10%, broadly Northwestern European 11%, Southern European 24%, Italian 23%, Greek Balkan 0.6, Spanish Portuguese 0.2, broadly Southern European 0.7, and then I have Eastern European is 21%, and broadly European 4.2%, and then I have this trace ancestry and unassigned 0.3 and 0.1. So it's interesting to see the difference, but yeah. It's fascinating. I think it's cool to look at that stuff, even though it's slightly different and it doesn't always match up exactly. It's still neat to see, I think. I like those things. I'm half English, like Sussex, I guess, sucks sometimes. But my grandmother makes up for it. She, the Queen of Ireland. She's the Queen of Ireland. Here's a minion, JK. Fair. No, you're cool. Anyway, hopefully that wasn't boring to listen to, and hopefully it was enjoyable. But I'm hitting an hour and a half mark. Oh my goodness. So I try to keep these videos around an hour for the lives. Want to thank everyone for hanging out. If there's any final thoughts or comments on further looking into cultural and traditions versus religion, would love to talk about it. Definitely could do more lives like this, because I'd like to talk about cultural traditions and how some people consider them religious and other people consider them to just be cultural. And I think we see a lot of that stuff happen in a lot of different traditions, such as Poland, right? Some of them wear amber, which is supposed to be for protection, but they swear they just wear it because amber is just their thing. So it might have older cultural traditions, but they have disconnected from the religious purpose that might have been behind it at one time. So anyway, yes, and I like these deep dives. Always enjoyable. I appreciate, Fadista, always you coming to hang out with me. I see you often. Oh, you retracted your message. Okay. Well, sorry I read it, because now it's locked out there forever. But, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I enjoy these conversations as well. So, appreciate you coming to hang out. Everyone, you have yourself a great Saturday, and I guess I will catch you next time. LOL, didn't get it all out. Hi and bye. I've only caught the last 10 to 15 minutes. No worries, Grassland G. Appreciate you coming to hang out. I actually started an hour earlier today. Good live. Thank you, Dusty Dead. Justin Kemp, good work. Well, thank you. Yes, please do more of these deep dives. Absolutely. Like I said, I'm trying to stick with regular Saturdays as often as I can now that I have stable stream again. Maybe it'll be worth hanging out, so you won't see me going. That's my interpretation of freezing. I think the last one was a little bit more convincing. Anyway, catch you next time. Thanks.